Hello, my name is Aurbit and today is a very special day because we are taking a look at a brand new 6-sample plugin. It feels like forever since I released Spot On, which is why I couldn't be more excited to show you Aurbit. Aurbit is a collection of 12 modulation effects inspired by classic hardware, which includes 4 choruses, 4 phasers, and 4 flangers, all musical, warm, and lightning fast to get working in any mix. I've always been drawn to the vintage modulation effects from the 70s and 80s and whatnot. Somehow they just make your sounds feel thick and alive. When it comes to plugins though, I kept running into 2 extremes. On the one hand, you have the single unit emulations, which are nice, but also kind of limited and often quite pricey. On the other, you have these huge all-in-one modulation suites, which can get you the sound if you are willing to spend the time, but they never quite felt quick and inspiring to me. Aurbit is my answer to this exact gap. It has the character and warmth, but in an intuitive and modern package. Let's dive in and see what it can do. Thanks for joining in. Alright, so as for the demo project that I will be showing you Aurbit with, I'm gonna use the 40th track for my year-long challenge Project 52 that I'm doing currently on YouTube. And I started doing the track, I started using Aurbit a lot, and I figured why not show you the plugin in this overview video using this project that I have been working on for the past 2 days. Alright, so this is the plugin. Let's maybe go through all the controls first, and then I'll show you a couple of examples from this demo project and how the plugin actually sounds. So feel free to use the chapter marks down below if you are just here to listen to the sound. I'll get to that in just a moment, but if you're interested in the controls and what the plugin can do, bear with me here and I'll go through them for you. Okay, so the most obvious thing you immediately notice are these 3 icons in the center here. These are your choruses, your phasers, and your flangers. I just tried to come up with describing icons. I'm not sure if I succeeded. A lot of people have been telling me that this looks like a Wi-Fi icon, and I just now see it. So hopefully it's not too confusing, but this is the chorus icon, this is the phaser icon, and this is the flanger icon. You'll get used to them very quickly as I did, and I think it's kind of cool that they are in this kind of icon format. For each of these 3 effects you have 4 types. The types you can choose from these numbers down here, so you can freely change these effects and the type will stay the same. And for all 3 effects also, the types have a same type of character. So if you select the option 2 and go through the effects, you can hear that the second type is always kind of same sounding. So if I just quickly go through them, the first one is often the kind of a good starting point, the modern and clean version. The second one is kind of a dark and thicker option. The third one is almost like sparse and it has a lot of character, so that's what you can go for if you are looking for something a bit different. And then the fourth option is a thick and bright. So this might be the most modern option with the first one that you can go for. So this has usually the most high end if that's what you need. So in total you have 12 flavors to choose from, and those give you enough options to find the right sound for almost any situation I've found while testing. So that's the whole reason of the plugin, for you to be able to just load it in any situation where you need some sort of modulation and movement, and then you can just go through these effects, the options, and find the one that fits your situation the best. Alright, so that's the essence of the plugin. You choose the main effect from these icons and then you choose the mode from these and you are in most cases already good to go. I just realized that I didn't take note on what the original setting for this track was, so I might have already messed up my project, but it doesn't matter. I'll just load up a new instance of Aurbit and we can use that to go through the rest of the settings. Okay, so now that we understand what the main thing in this plugin is, we can go through all the things you can do with it, and I'll start from the name label, and this is actually the case for every 6-sample plugin. So you can press the name, actually excluding names because it has its own power button, but anyway, you can press the name to bypass all processing. So if you have something playing and you want to hear the difference, you can just toggle this and it'll gray out the background and only the name will stay kind of the same color. So So that's your indication that you are bypassing the processor. Then you have the presets. I've made 10 factor presets for you to experiment with, and of course you can also save your own. In the settings screen you have all the basic stuff that you can find in any other 6-sample plugin as well, including the color themes. But what's different in Aurbit is that you have this output limiter option, which is enabled by default. And what it does is that it adds a very transparent and clean sounding limiter at the end of all processing. And why I don't just have a clipper as I do with some of the other plugins is that in Aurbit, where you have these resonant frequencies with some of the effects, for example like phasers and flangers, they don't sound very good when pushed into a clipper. You get a lot of distortion, so I wanted to keep things clean, and I made a brand new limiter for just Aurbit to keep things clean even if you run things quite hot into it. And when the limiter is working its magic, you'll see a kind of a outline to the whole plugin window, which signifies that you are hitting the limiter. I can maybe show it to you with some of the sound. So if we just like go to the kick of the track, for example, and add some gain in front, you can see that the outlines are flashing whenever you hit the limiter, and it's trying to keep things in order. So that's your sign that you should probably bring down the input volume a bit if you want to keep things as close to the original as possible without adding any distortion. All right, then let's move on to the main controls that you have at the bottom of the plugin window. And let's start from the rate, which is pretty self-explanatory. That'll be your rate of modulation that is going to be for all of the different effects. Actually, all of these knobs are shared between all of these, and it doesn't matter which one you have selected, you will keep the same settings down in these knobs. The rate is just the speed that you are doing whatever modulation you are doing, and you can see the speed that the effect is oscillating at by these lines that are going behind the icons. That's kind of your indication of the speed that you are doing the modulation with. And what you can also do is press this note icon here, which will enable you to sync the modulation to your host. So this is now BPM synced, and for my project it's 153 BPM. If, for example, I select 1:1, it'll modulate once for each beat of the track that you are working with. Next up we have depth, which is also found in many other modulation effects, and this is just the range in which the modulation is done. So if you're thinking about a phaser, for example, where you have an all-pass filter, this is now a bit technical, but what you have in phasers is that you have a all-pass filter modulating back and forth in the frequency range. What the depth is doing is that it's, if you're taking the depth down, it's making the range that the filter is modulating in smaller, and it goes all the way down to not moving at all. So if you take the depth all the way down, there will be no movement and the sound will kind of stay static. And the same thing goes for these other effects as well. They don't have all pass filters, but rather it's delay lines, and they are modulating the delay lines to create the effects. So you also do the same thing where you modulate in a longer time frame if you have more depth. So that is what the depth knob is doing. For some other plugins it can be kind of the mix knob, but we have a separate mix knob here. So this one is the range of the modulation and not the kind of the strength of the effect or the amount of the effect. But once you get to play around with the plugin, it's pretty easy to understand what it's doing. Next up we have the width knob, which is also pretty self-explanatory. That'll just be your stereo width of the wedge signal of the effect. 100%, so the default setting will mean all the width that you can get out of the plugin, and when you take it down all the way to 0%, that'll be fully mono, so all the effect is coming from the center of your stereo field. On top of the width knob we have these two circle looking icons, and these are your stereo modes. So the default mode, which is this kind of two circles crossing each other type thing, that's your wide stereo mode. So that means the modulation that is being applied to whatever the effect is doing that you have selected. That'll be different for both of your stereo channels. So the modulation will be slightly different for your left channel, so your left ear, and also slightly different for your right channel, so your right ear. And this results in a very wide effect, and with this you can use Aurbit as a kind of stereo widener as well. So you can make narrow sounds into something very wide. This is how some modulation effects work by default, and there's no way to change it. And how some modulation effects work, especially phasers and flangers, is that they apply the same modulation to both channels at the same time. So the stereo width of your signal stays the same, but you just add the effect on top. So that is what this single circle is, and this is your narrow stereo mode. So it's not making the sound mono, that's only if you turn the width knob down, but it's keeping the stereo width of the original signal the same and just modulating the channels in the same way, which means you don't add or lose any of the stereo width that you had. Alright, I'll show you these three knobs next. I know there is this curious looking thing in the center here, which I'll get to in just a moment, and that'll be the last thing that I'll show you before we jump into the audio examples. But next up, I'll show you the heat knob, which is adding a slight saturation and compression to your sound if you need extra presence. So this is kind of your distortion saturation that you can add on top of the effect if you want some added crunch and if you want to push the sound a little bit better through the mix, which reduces the overall processing that you have to do after the effect. So that's just kind of a little convenience thing, and it's also cool always to have a little bit of distortion, because who doesn't love distortion? Then the clean knob, which is pretty interesting. What it's doing in its default mode, which is this kind of line icon here, it's representing a high pass filter or a low cut filter, and this is called the low cut mode. And when you turn up the knob from the off state first, it'll start rolling off the low end of the effect to reduce the amount of phase cancellation that you might get if you mix the dry signal and the wet signal together. So the more you turn up the knob, the more you take away from the low end, and that can make the sound lighter and kind of brighter as well. So if you just want a little bit of like white sparkle on top of your tri signal or something like that, use the low cut mode and just turn it up to the place where it sounds good to you, and then just blend it with the dry signal and you should be good to go. But the more interesting mode from these two is the circle thing with the line in the center, which is the low mono mode, and this is pretty unique. So when you turn up the clean knob when in the low mono mode, what you are doing is that you are making all the frequencies below the label here, so below 187 Hz we are making the frequencies fully mono, but only in the wet signal. So that means the fully processed wet signal will have a fully mono and unprocessed low end, and all the frequencies on top of that will be processed with your selected modulation effect. This makes your low end very solid in your mix, and it avoids phase cancellation that can happen when you are doing these types of modulation effects, and the sound is moving around in the stereo field. And when you play it in a mono sound system, those two signals combine, and in some points they might cancel each other out completely, and in some points they might like reinforce each other. If you use the low mono mode and turn the low end into mono, it'll always stay the same no matter where you play your track. What's interesting about the low mono mode as well is that when you use it and turn the mix knob, your bass or the frequencies that are below the set point here are going to stay the same volume every time. So no matter what position your mix knob is in, your low end will be the same loudness even though you have monoed it to the center. And when you mix those two, it can sometimes like reinforce the bass where in the center you have more bass than you want or something like that. So the relationships between the frequencies will always stay the same, but the only thing is that you have just made your low end and bass more solid. Alright, then we have the mix knob, which I have already kind of explained. So this is just your blend between the fully processed signal and the dry signal, that's kind of the audio coming into the plugin. And then lastly we have this very little, almost unnoticeable slider here, and this is your phase slider. So what Aurbit is doing that's not always the case for every modulation effect out there is that it's locking the modulation phase with the host. So no matter when you play your track or when you press play or at what position of the track you start from, the plugin will always sound the same and consistent. In many similar effects, the modulation will happen in the background kind of constantly, no matter if you have pressed play or just idling in your DAW, the modulation will always be in the background. And how it sounds then in your track entirely depends on when you press play, which should not be the case. What Aurbit is doing that it's detecting the playback position and starting the modulation always in the same place for that section of your track, if that makes sense. So what you can do with the phase slider then is that you can choose the starting phase of the modulation. So if I would play the track from the very beginning and have the phase slider in the center, it would start the modulation from the center of the modulation curve, whatever the curve is. It might be sine wave for some of the effects, or it might be triangle or something else, but it'll always start it from the same place. And if I then move the slider, for example, all the way to the left, the modulation will start from the same spot, but instead of going up, it will start going down. Something in between will be the very lowest point of the modulation, and something in here would be kind of the peak. So you can use the slider to kind of find the right sound for the important positions in your track. So if you want to have kind of a phaser peak in a place before the chorus or something, you can do that by just moving the slider here and finding the place where the modulation sounds just right in your music. That probably wasn't the best explanation, but I hope it makes sense. And by the way, if you have any questions of any of the other controls either, or about the plugin in general, please leave them down in the comments. I would love to hear them. I'll get back to you as fast as possible. I know my explanations are far from the best, so I would be happy to clear things up for you if you have any questions. So those are all the features of Aurbit. I know there has been now a lot of talking and no demos or audio or anything, so I'll now show you a couple of things in the project that I have been working on, and then we'll call it a day and wrap up the video. I'll first maybe play you a couple of sections from the full track, and then I'll show you a few individual elements that I have used Aurbit on and what it's doing to the sound. So this is first the track that we are working with, just for a little bit of context. Aurbit in a lot of the tracks in here, and I have actually assigned all of them into one MIDI control. So here is the track now without all of the Aurbits. And let's turn on all the Aurbits. Alright, a couple of things in here that I will show you individually. The first one is maybe the kick drum, which is not the place that you would usually use phasers on, but for some reason the third mode of the phasers worked very well for this kick, and it makes it so much better. I don't know why that is, to be honest. I didn't think it would work, but it just worked. So have a listen to this. This is now first the kick drum with Aurbit. And by the way, you can also see that I have turned the heat all the way up, so we also have a lot of compression and saturation, so that might have something to do with the fact that it's so much better. But here is now the kick without Aurbit. With Aurbit. Next up, let's maybe go to, I can pretty much select any of these. Let's maybe go to the bass. So here I have used one of the factory presets called Funky Bass, and it just makes everything so sexy. Have a listen to this. Without Aurbit. With Aurbit. Let's maybe go to the main sound that's in the intro as well, so it's this one. wait, I think the second Aurbit is the one that we used to showcase the feature, so let's just get rid of it. Alright, so the main effect that I actually wanted to add for this sound is the first chorus. So this is the effect that will be the default one when you first load up the plugin. Let's hear the sound again with the actual correct effect. And the mix is actually 100%, so we have only the wet signal. And then without Aurbit, it's a bit darker and also much narrower with Aurbit. Okay, let's do a couple more. I have this melody here for the last section of the track, as it is so far. It's not finished yet, but for the starting section here, so it sounds like this. And it's using the second flanger without Aurbit. Again, very narrow, but also we are adding a bit of that kind of, I don't know even how you describe it, movement that also sounds a bit flangery. Flangery, that's not probably the word. But the second mode is, as I said, did I even say that? Darker than the others. I think I described what these modes are for all three effects. So if I were to select the first flanger, for example, you can hear that the sound's completely different. Or with the third one. But for this sound, I thought the second one was nice and it made everything super wide, but it didn't have too much of the flangery jet plane effect, you know. So that's the reason I went for the second flanger for this sound here. I just have to show you the guitar. And this is also using the first chorus mode, which is, it's super nice. And we have quite a bit of heat, so I'll show you soon what it sounds like without the heat. So then we go into this section. Sounds super nice. So let's take away Aurbit. Huge difference. And let's maybe do the effect, but without the heat. It's so much better. Alright, then lastly, I maybe have to show you the vocal as well. I've used a little bit of Aurbit here as well. Let's first play to you with Aurbit as it was in the track.
We can come back, but the time is gone.
So this is now with Aurbit.
'Cause I gave you my whole life, and instead you gave me nothing.
And then let's take away Aurbit and it suddenly becomes a lot more static.
We can come back, but the time is gone. 'Cause I gave you my whole life, and instead you gave me nothing.
It's also a bit louder, of course, because we have a tiny bit of heat, but you can hear that it's a bit more upfront. Again, of course, partly due to the loudness, but also you can hear the movement of the phaser in the background and the sides, which is not present if you don't have Aurbit. Alright, I think that's enough of the overview. I would highly appreciate if you would check out Aurbit. There's also a 14-day unrestricted trial version available if you want to try it out first. And if in that 14-day time frame you decide to go for it, there is a 2-week launch sale of 30% of the original price starting from the release date of this video, I think. So it's a good time to get yours if you want to have Aurbit in your toolbox as well. Oh, and the link to the website is of course in the description. I'm so excited to finally get this plugin out. I can't tell you how happy I am to get it out to the world, and I am absolutely thrilled to hear your thoughts once you've given it a go. So if you wanna tell me what you think, you can send me an email or leave a comment or hit me up in the Six Temple Discord server or whatever. I would love to hear your thoughts and maybe even feedback if there are some things you might want to see in the future updates of Aurbit, which by the way you also get for free if you purchase the plugin. So all the future updates, no matter how big. Okay, that's it for the video. Please check out Aurbit if you're interested. Also subscribe to the channel and like the video. I would really appreciate it as well if you were to share this video with your friends or whoever might be interested in the plugin. That would be super cool of you. And yeah, that's all I have to say, I guess. I hope you liked the plugin. Thank you for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.